Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Well, the Winter Olympics have ended, but the sports calendar continues to roll on. Now it's time for one of my favorite events, the World Baseball Classic. Is it a stupid name for the tournament? Yes. Is it a celebration of how different countries play the greatest game ever invented? Also, yes. It's one of the few times outside of the Major League Baseball postseason where fans can actually see players showing emotion and celebrating the beautiful game. I know the WBC isn't the best baseball that's played each year, and I wish they could find a better time of the year to hold the tournament, but I honestly don't know when a better time would be, because pitchers only have a certain number of innings in their arms each year. So the only time it makes sense for the WBC to take place is right now in the middle of spring training. Regardless, I'll be watching as many games as I can and rooting for all the Baltimore Orioles who are taking part in the event. Hopefully, they all come back to Baltimore healthy. That's all for today's update on what Aaron will be watching coming up soon. Let's dive into today's show by taking a listener question. Today's question comes from Sam on Instagram. I think it's the first Instagram question I've had here on the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Sam says, "Greetings. I've been listening to your podcast for a while now. I fall asleep to it almost every night. I have a quick question for the show. Was Yoda's strict adherence to the Jedi Code and tradition his greatest strength or his most fatal flaw?" Thank you very much for the question, Sam. For me, the answer to both of your questions is yes. But who cares what I think? George Lucas himself has said that the biggest failure of the Jedi Order as an institution was that the rules and traditions of the Order became more important than the spirit behind them. The first time we hear Obi-Wan Kenobi describe the Jedi in A New Hope, he says that for over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. Their jobs were to help the people who couldn't help themselves, to mediate disputes, and of course, to guard against the Sith and the dark side of the Force from coming into power. So why did the Jedi Order fail? Well, there have been a few times where George Lucas has said that even when an institution has the best of intentions and does good work, one of the biggest flaws of that institution is that it becomes rigid. Institutions begin to focus more on how they operate and forget their original mission statements. It's the same with Yoda and the Jedi Order. By the time Palpatine began rising to power, the Jedi Order was no longer focused on helping all the people of the galaxy, but helping the people specifically of the Republic. And for the individual Jedi, the rules had changed from understanding your feelings and working through them in a way that allows you to fulfill your mission to emotional attachments are bad. Ignore them. Yoda even says in the prequels that the Jedi aren't able to see what's really happening in the galaxy, why people are becoming disillusioned and angry with the status quo. So, yes, Sam, I do believe Yoda's adherence to the rules was his biggest flaw in the prequels. I also think his adherence to those same rules and traditions were his biggest strengths in the original trilogy, in training Luke Skywalker. I just think that the tenets of the Jedi Order might work better on a small scale, on an individual scale, and probably not on a large institutional scale. Thanks again for the question, Sam. Listener, if you'd like to ask me a question, you can send an email to swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Twitter at SW Legends Lounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's show. I'll be wrapping up the Jedi Apprentice Young Reader series. Today, I'll be talking about books 17 and 18 in the main series. Those are titled The Only Witness and The Threat Within, followed by the two special editions that came later, Deceptions and The Followers. Those two books feature flashbacks of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and flash forwards of Obi-Wan training Anakin. Once again, all four of these books are written by Jude Watson. Listener, grab yourself a drink, and let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Book number 17 of the series is The Only Witness. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are sent to the planet Frigo to escort the young widow of a mob boss to Coruscant to testify against her family. The Cobral crime family runs Frigo. Their reign began 20 years ago when Lino Cobral's husband's father took over the government. The elder Cobral died a few years prior, and control of the family passed down to Lena's husband, Rutan. But Rutan was the youngest of the three Cobral boys, and his older brothers, Solon and Bard, weren't particularly happy with Rutan taking over the family business. Lena tells Qui-Gon that before her husband was murdered, he had become disillusioned with the way the Cobrals plundered the planet to grow their fortune. Lena says Rutan was killed because he had built a case against his family and had planned to turn all of the evidence over to the Republic. Now, Lena's brother-in-law, Solon, runs the organization, and Lena is the only one who can fulfill her husband's wishes and bring the criminal organization down. But Lena needs evidence. It's in the Cobral mansion. Lena says she knows how to find it, but she'll need the Jedi to help sneak her inside. Now, Qui-Gon says he and Obi-Wan's mission is only to safely transport Lena to Coruscant, not help her investigate her family. But Obi-Wan argues a Jedi's job is to help people in need. Reluctantly, Qui-Gon agrees. He can see that his Padawan is kind of smitten with Lena, but liberating the people of Frigo from beneath the Cobral family's boot is a worthy cause. The Jedi and Lena infiltrate the Cobral family mansion. Inside, Lena heads to the study where she finds the information she needs to bring down Solon and Bard. As they turn to leave, the group runs into Lena's mother-in-law, Zanita. Lena says the woman has always been kind to her, and Zanita proves it, allowing Lena and the Jedi to sneak back out of the mansion. As Lena and the Jedi head back to her hideout, they're attacked by Solon's forces. Lena's cousin is killed in the attack, but Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are able to get Lena safely to the spaceport and off of Frigo. Now, when the group lands on Coruscant, Lena is taken in front of the Senate where she lays out all the crimes the Cobral family has committed on Frigo over the last 20 years. Following her testimony, Lena is attacked in her hotel room by Zanita. Her mother-in-law wants revenge on Lena for putting Solon and Bard into prison. Lena is wounded in the attack, but luckily Obi-Wan stops Zanita before she can finish the job. The story ends with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan going to see Lena in the med center. Qui-Gon thanks Obi-Wan for his support following Tall's death a few months ago and the comfort he gave him, allowing Qui-Gon to find himself again. The Only Witness was pretty good. I would say it's probably somewhere in the middle of the 18 books in this series. There are definitely some stories I enjoyed more than The Only Witness, and there are one or two stories that I didn't enjoy as much. One part that was amusing was the obvious crush that Obi-Wan develops for Lena Cabral. The woman is only 3 years older than Obi-Wan. In this story, he's 17 years old, she's 20. And Qui-Gon can see that his Padawan is smitten with the pretty young woman. Obi-Wan never says anything about it. Of course, Lena has only recently lost her husband. At least as far as the story goes, she never seems to notice the way that Obi-Wan is looking at her. At least she never mentions it, and the text never says anything about her thinking it, which makes sense. She's only recently been widowed, and she's got herself a mission to try to find the evidence that will take down this criminal organization. So that's fine. But I think Qui-Gon only makes one small mention about the crush that Obi-Wan seems to have. He tells Obi-Wan to mind his feelings. One thing about the prequel movies and the Clone Wars animated show, we never really got much of a long conversation between Obi-Wan and Anakin about Anakin's feelings toward Padme Amidala. Because Obi-Wan and Anakin never really have those conversations in episode 2 or episode 3. At least to the level that I think may have been helpful for Anakin. I kind of wish Jude Watson would have put that kind of conversation into this book. And maybe the reason she didn't is because then it kind of shows how history is repeating itself. Qui-Gon didn't really sit Obi-Wan down and have a talk with him about these feelings of infatuation that Obi-Wan was experiencing toward Lena. And maybe it was just a little too close for Qui-Gon. Only a few months prior, he had pledged his love to Tal, and she reciprocated, and then she died. So maybe it was a conversation that Qui-Gon just couldn't have at the moment. But I really do think that would have been interesting to see in this story. Other than that, it was a fine one-off adventure. Now, book number 18, the final installment of the main part of the Jedi Apprentice series, is The Threat Within. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are sent to the Vorzid system to mediate a dispute between Vorzid 4 and Vorzid 5. Vorzid 4 has traditionally been the most powerful planet in the system. It's the planet rich in natural resources and produces most of the food and goods in the system. For generations, the people of Vorzid 5 have had to import nearly everything from Vorzid 4 just to survive. But recently, the people of Vorzid 5 have built a bunch of amusement parks and casinos, making the planet a tourist destination. And now the credits have started rolling in. Following Vorzid 5's recent popularity and a series of small industrial accidents on Vorzid 4, the people of Vorzid 4 accuse Vorzid 5 of sabotage. When Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan arrive on Vorzid 4, they meet with Chairman Port, who tells the Jedi that everything on Vorzid 4 revolves around work. The adults work sunup to sundown. When they go home, they read about how to improve their work. And the schools are set up to train Vorzidiac children how to work. Obi-Wan thinks it's extremely monotonous and boring on Vorzit 4. And it turns out he's not the only one. Because the accidents and the interruptions are not coming from the people of Vorzit 5, but from a group of teenagers on Vorzit 4 who call themselves the Freelies. The Freelies want to get their parents' attention, to think about something other than work, and to enjoy themselves every once in a while. Obi-Wan goes undercover with the Freelies and meets the group's leader, a boy named Grath, who, coincidentally, is the son of Chairman Port. Grath tells Obi-Wan that the group's attacks are only designed to interrupt production on the planet. They're annoying, but nobody ever gets hurt. However, Obi-Wan can tell that not all of the Freelies are happy just pulling annoying pranks. A small group of the Freelies, led by a boy named Flip, want to make the attacks a little more serious, and they start by sabotaging some of the morning buses in the capital. The Freelies plan to use small explosives to mess up the morning commute. Grath wants to set them to explode in the city's bus corral before anyone has boarded. But Flip and his followers delay a few of the explosions for later. Now, when those bombs go off, several Vorzidiacs are injured. Initially, Qui-Gon wants to step in and expose the Freelies to their parents, but Obi-Wan asks for a chance to talk to Grath, to convince him and the other teens to come free on their own. Qui-Gon agrees, and Obi-Wan tries to reason with the Freelies, but the teenagers have already planned another prank: to destroy an abandoned building near one of the main work factories. However, it turns out the building is not abandoned on the day of the explosion. Chairman Port and a group of Vorzidiac leaders are meeting there with Qui-Gon to discuss how to retaliate against Vorzid 5, who they believe are still behind the attacks. When Obi-Wan learns about the meeting, he uses the Force to warn Qui-Gon. The Jedi Master ushers everyone out of the building just before it blows. Everyone is safe. Everyone, that is, except for Flip. After setting the bomb, the boy was not able to escape the building before it exploded. The story ends with Grath and the Freelies coming clean to their parents and the adults of Vorzid 4, agreeing to spend less time working and more time enjoying their friends and their families. Unfortunately for me, this was one of the books of the series that I didn't find as entertaining. It is a good story. It's a good message, I should say. It's a warning about becoming obsessed, becoming obsessive. The people of Vorzid 4 are not bad people at all. They believe in a strong work ethic. They believe in dedication to their jobs, to making their planet as successful as possible. But in doing so, they neglect each other on a personal level. They neglect to enjoy their friends. They neglect to enjoy their families. They neglect their spouses, their children. They neglect themselves. Nobody's life can revolve around one thing. Because if you do, you neglect the other things that make your life worth living. So, obviously a good message. just for me, I find Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan the most interesting when they're together, when they disagree on how to do something, when they disagree with each other's opinions, but then they talk it out and figure out how to work together. And in this story, there isn't much of that. In fact, I think the only time is when Qui-Gon wants to go to the parents to talk about who the Freelies are. And Obi-Wan convinces him to give him one shot to go back to the Freelies and to try to convince them to come clean about what they've been doing and what they feel. The story is fine. But when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are either separated for as long as they are, like in this book, or when they don't have that tension, that working tension, I just don't find the story as interesting. Now, listener, coming up after the break, I'll talk more about the Jedi Apprentice series. I'm Aaron Motes, and you're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Convergence is the first story in Phase 2 of the High Republic Publishing Initiative. The twin planets of Iram and Arano have been fighting for generations. When the Jedi sends a delegation to broker a ceasefire, it quickly becomes apparent that the two worlds are merely pawns in someone else's game. Unravel the mystery in Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes, and today I'm wrapping up my journey through the Jedi Apprentice Young Reader series. In the first half of the show, I talked about the last two books of the main series, but there were two more special edition stories written by Jude Watson that feature both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan when they were together, and then Obi-Wan and Anakin a decade later. The first of these special edition stories is called Deceptions. We flash back to the time following Obi-Wan's fight with Brooke Chun at the top of a waterfall in the Jedi Temple. The fight ended when Brooke slipped and fell to his death. Brooke's father, Vox, and his brother, Cad, arrive on Coruscant to attend a Senate hearing to investigate Brooke's death. During the hearing, Vox's lawyer grills Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and another Padawan, Bant Irin, about the sequence of events that led to Brooke's fall. Qui-Gon answers the questions calmly and confidently, refusing to fall into any of the lawyer's traps, and supporting Obi-Wan's interpretation of what happened. But Bant and Obi-Wan don't fare as well on the stand. The lawyer twists their answers in such a way that Bant questions whether or not she really was in mortal danger when Brooke chained her underwater. The lawyer grills Obi-Wan even harder. He accuses the Padawan of being jealous of Brooke, of hating Brooke, and he says Obi-Wan saw an opportunity to get Brooke out of the picture. However, in the end, Qui-Gon discovers a recording of his former Padawan Xanatos and Brooke conspiring to hold Bant hostage. Vox says the recording is fake, but the Senate committee believes its validity. The committee declares Brooke's death an accident and clears Obi-Wan of any wrongdoing. The Chuns leave in a huff, but not before Cad takes a swing at Obi-Wan. He misses, but he calls Obi-Wan a murderer before leaving the committee room. Flash forward a decade, and we see Obi-Wan and his young Padawan Anakin Skywalker called before the Jedi Council. They're sent to investigate a strange ship called the Biocruiser. The enormous vessel is filled with people from throughout the galaxy who are fed up with what they believe are increasingly corrupt planetary governments. The people who run the Biocruiser hope to become entirely self-sufficient, but as of now, it still needs to dock occasionally to take on resources. The Jedi Council says that someone on the Biocruiser says the people on the vessel who want to leave are being held against their will. When Obi-Wan and Anakin arrive, they're met by the Biocruiser's leader, Cad Chun. Cad's anger at seeing Obi-Wan again confuses Anakin. But that's nothing compared to the anger he feels when Vox appears. The Elder Chun wants his son to kick the Jedi off his ship, but Cad refuses. He tells Obi-Wan to go ahead. Search the Biocruiser. He has nothing to hide. The investigation begins, and eventually the Jedi discover some interesting information in the ship's computer system. Whenever the Biocruiser is forced to dock somewhere to take on supplies, Vox Chun takes a shuttle down to the planet's surface. When Obi-Wan and Anakin search Vox's room, they find a hidden stash of precious gems. They also find something way, way worse. That the Biocruiser is set to explode. And Xanatos' old mining company, Offworld, is behind the plot. Obi-Wan confronts Cad with the information, but Cad really doesn't know anything. It turns out Vox is the person behind it all. The Jedi move to arrest Vox when suddenly Offworld ships surround the Biocruiser, double-crossing the Elder Chun. Luckily, Obi-Wan and Cad are able to fight off Offworld's battle droids while Anakin and another Jedi fend off the attacking ships. The story ends with Cad flying a heavily damaged Biocruiser to a nearby planet. He and the Jedi evacuate the passengers before the vessel explodes. The second of these special edition books is called The Followers. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan investigate a professor named Merc Lundy, who teaches classes about the ancient Sith. Lundy's classes are very popular, with hundreds of students attending his lectures. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan agree the lectures are informative and very entertaining, but there's something weird going on too. Lundy often appears angry, yelling about the power of the Sith and the weakness of the Jedi. There are also 3 students in the class who appear eager to help Lundy on an upcoming historical dig to the planet Kodai, where a Sith holocron is rumored to be buried. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan follow Lundy to Kodai, a planet almost entirely covered with water. But every 10 years, there's a special low tide that allows the people living on the one small continent to venture out onto the exposed seafloor and gather up relics from their planet's history. Lundy believes there's an ancient Sith temple under the Kodai Ocean that he can access during this low tide. And that's where he thinks the Sith holocron is. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan follow Lundy as he ventures out during the low tide, but the professor hasn't found the holocron. He's gone mad. And the Jedi are forced to save Lundy from drowning before the tide starts coming in. 10 years later, the Jedi Council wants Obi-Wan and Anakin to return to Kodai because someone else is looking for the Sith holocron. They want the Jedi to take the insane professor along to help because they think one of his students is the person looking for the holocron. And of course, the Council is right. It's 2 students, in fact, that went searching for the holocron. The first one the Jedi find is a young man named Omal. Initially, Obi-Wan is wary of Omal, but it quickly becomes apparent that the holocron has diminished the young man. Like Professor Lundy, Omal has gone insane. But that leaves Lundy's other star pupil, a man named Norval. Obi-Wan and Anakin track Norval to the planet Plu 2. Obi-Wan confronts Norval, who has used the holocron to construct his own lightsaber. But of course, the young man is no match for a trained Jedi Knight. Obi-Wan defeats Norval pretty easily in a very short battle and retrieves the Sith holocron. The story ends with Obi-Wan and Anakin returning to Coruscant and giving the holocron to the Jedi Council to store inside the temple vault. So I really enjoyed these two special editions. I like how Jude Watson juxtaposed the events of the past with the events taking place soon after Anakin becomes Obi-Wan's Padawan. Anakin in this story is only about 10 years old. Qui-Gon's death only occurred a few months before these stories take place. The most enjoyable parts of these two stories, in my opinion, are the inner monologue that Obi-Wan has when he is dealing with Anakin, when he is experiencing some of the special things that Anakin can do. He thinks about his interactions with Qui-Gon. Things like, now I understand why Qui-Gon said something like this to me. Or, now I understand why Qui-Gon would tell me to take a breath, look inside myself before making a decision. Obi-Wan can tell that Anakin is special. Obi-Wan makes mention a few times that Anakin is so far advanced at his age, way more advanced than Obi-Wan was. And we occasionally get a thought or two from Obi-Wan about his reservations training Anakin. Not that he doesn't think Anakin will grow up to be a great Jedi, but he has reservations that he is the teacher that Anakin needs. A few times in both stories, Obi-Wan thinks that Anakin would have been better off with Qui-Gon. That Qui-Gon's wisdom is what Anakin needs right now. In the second story specifically, when the two Jedi are tasked with finding the Sith holocron, Obi-Wan notices that Anakin is very interested in some of the mad ramblings of the Professor Merc Lundy about the power that the ancient Sith used to wield. And one thing about Anakin, he always wanted to test himself. He always wanted to try to become better than everyone else. Part of it was a competition. Anakin wanted to be the best. Anakin wanted to be the most powerful. And there are a couple times in the second book where Anakin asks Obi-Wan about the power that the Sith wielded back in the time of the Old Republic. So Obi-Wan notices these things, and because of that, he ruminates occasionally that Qui-Gon probably would have been a better teacher for Anakin. And maybe Obi-Wan was right. We'll never know. So before I wrap up, let me talk about the series as a whole. This is the first time I've read through the Jedi Apprentice series. I had no intentions of reading them when I started this podcast, but I had so many emails over the years about reading this series because they were a fan favorite, especially of people who really like the prequel movies. So I said, sure, I'll read them. If you guys like them and want to know my opinion, great. I'm glad I read these books, but I am 48 years old. I'm not the target audience. The books are fun. The books are interesting. The books are quick reads. The books hold your attention as you're reading them, even for someone like me, someone who is not the target audience and someone who still isn't a big fan of the prequel films. But I'm glad I read these books. For the most part, the stories were interesting. My favorite stories were absolutely books numbers 5 and 6, The Defenders of the Dead and The Uncertain Path. The two books where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan go to the planet Malida Don, and they find the two factions, the Malida and the Don, who have been warring for generations. They don't even really remember why they started fighting. But by the times of the books, they're only fighting to avenge the people who have died in the past. And when the two Jedi go to the planet, they discover these young people, these teenagers in the underground who no longer want to fight. And they want to try to prove to the adults that there can be peace on Malida Don. Obi-Wan is touched by the cause of the young ones. And at the end of the first book, the Defenders of the Dead decides to leave the Jedi Order to help the young ones stop the fighting on Malida Don. Of course, by the end of the second book, he realizes that he still needs to be a Jedi Knight. Even though he still believes in the cause of the young ones, his destiny lies with the Jedi. These are my two favorite stories because you constantly had that tension between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon is focused on the mission, which is to free Tal, who has been taken hostage. Obi-Wan wants to help the people who no longer want to fight to stop the fighting. It's almost the opposite of the Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan we see in The Phantom Menace, where Obi-Wan is so mission-focused. But Qui-Gon is the one who more liberally interprets the mission parameters from the Jedi Council. I'm sure that's one of the reasons why I like these two stories the most in the series. But ultimately, I think these two books had my favorite interactions between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. I'm glad I read these books. I wasn't the target audience. I'm sure I would have enjoyed them more if I read them as a young teenager, someone that was between 10 and 13. But they were entertaining. I probably won't read them again, but I'm glad I read them this time. So now it is time to wrap up. Listener, if you'd like to contact me, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Twitter at swlegendslounge. Send me your questions, your comments. If you disagree with something I've said on the show about these Jedi Apprentice books or anything else, let me know. I'll read your opinion on the show. And send me your favorite Star Wars character groupings. I still haven't received any of those in 2026, and you guys know how much I love reading them. Now, coming up on the next episode, I'll be jumping ahead to the New Republic era, where I'll be covering the 3 comic runs in the Dark Empire series. You heard that right, listener. I will be doing an episode on some of these Star Wars comics. So tune in March 20th, because it'll be the only episode about comics that I cover here on the podcast. Listener, thank you so much for joining me today on the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in legends.